The Gospel according to Luke, chapter 22, verses 24 to 34. And there was also a strife among them, which of them should be accounted the greatest. And he said unto them, The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors. But ye shall not be so. But he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that doth serve. For whether is greater, he that sitteth at meat, or he that serveth? Is not he that sitteth at meat? But I am among you as he that serveth. Ye are they which have continued with me in my temptations. And I appoint unto you a kingdom, as my Father hath appointed upon me, that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not. And when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. And he said unto him, Lord, I am ready to go with thee, both into prison and to death. And he said, I tell thee, Peter, the cock shall not crow this day, before that thou shalt thrice deny that thou knowest me. There endeth our reading. Thank you, Lord. Amen. We are witness to the Last Supper in Jerusalem on the Thursday evening of the Passion Week, with Jesus and his disciples in a furnished upper chamber of a friend's house. In yesterday's reading, we were witness to two key scenes. One, Jesus announcing his betrayal at the Last Supper, to the, surprise of the disciples, of course, apart from Judas Iscariot, and innocent questioning among them of who it might be. And also the Holy Communion, the Eucharist, Jesus blessing the bread and the wine as symbolizing his flesh and his blood, the New Testament in his name. As we pointed out yesterday, the order of those is reversed in Luke compared to Mark and Matthew, and we'll have that same question in today's reading, in the continuation here of a scene coming right at the beginning of today's reading, which is in a different place in the other two synoptic Gospels. So picking up then directly following from yesterday's reading, when the disciples were questioning who it might be that should betray their master, we learn now in verse 24 of this chapter 22 of Luke that there was a strife among the disciples, which of them should be accounted the greatest, and Jesus then provides them with a lesson. Now, some commentators feel that this might be a revisiting of a continual kind of difficulty among the disciples about some kind of internal hierarchy among them. Other commentators feel that this has just been placed here by the author of the Gospel of Luke for narrative convenience, because we have this very same scene essentially in earlier parts of the Gospels in Mark and in Matthew, and also even in Luke, as I'll explain. So this first appears in the scene following the healing of the epileptic boy, and that's in all three synoptic Gospels. If, for example, we look at Matthew, in chapter 18 of Matthew, This is shortly after the epileptic boy has been healed. This occurred when Jesus came down from the mountain with Simon, Peter, and John and James. That healing took place, and shortly thereafter we had this scene. So in Matthew it's chapter 18 verse 1. At the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And there's a beautiful scene here. I'll just read a little of this. And Jesus called a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them, and said, Verily, I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. And a strong lesson there that humility is the key to entering the kingdom of heaven. We have a very similar scene actually in the Gospel of Luke itself, back in chapter 9. And let's just have a very brief look at that. Chapter 9, verse 46. And this is just after the healing of the epileptic boy. Verse 46. There then arose a reasoning among them, which of them should be greatest. And Jesus, perceiving the thought of their heart, took a child and set him by him, and said unto them, Whoever shall receive this child in my name receiveth me. And whosoever shall receive me receiveth him that sent me. And this is the key part here. For he that is least among you all, the same shall be great. And this is indeed the lesson that Jesus teaches here in this passage in Luke. Now, the second occasion we meet this in the other two synoptic gospels is following the improper approach to Jesus from James and John, the sons of Zebedee, requesting that they be on his left and right hand in the kingdom of heaven. So if we look at that passage in Mark, for example, Mark chapter 10, so they've come to him with this approach, and Jesus says to them here in verse 38, Ye know not what ye ask. Can ye drink of the cup that I drink of, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And then later on, the other 10 hear about this and are much displeased. And in verse 42, Jesus provides some teaching. But Jesus called them to him and saith unto them, You know that they which are accounted to rule over the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and their great ones exercise authority upon them. But so shall it not be among you, but whosoever will be great among you shall be your minister, and whosoever of you will be the chiefest shall be servant of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. And there we have really precisely this teaching. Now, the fact that Luke, for whatever reason, did not include that scene with James and John in his gospel, in a way, because he doesn't have that scene, he then doesn't have the narrative spur to provide that piece of teaching. And so in a sense, it's almost like it's being shoehorned in here into the Last Supper. So some commentators feel that it's just being revisited here. Others feel that it's just narratively inserted. I'm of the latter view for another reason, which is that after the solemnity of Jesus speaking about his imminent betrayal, after the solemnity of blessing the bread and the wine, after which in both Mark and Matthew they all leave the room and make their way to Gethsemane, it would be hard to imagine the disciples starting an argument among themselves in front of their master about who should be the greatest. So, I don't know, I feel it's perhaps awkward and unfortunate that it is here in this scene in Luke, because it's rather a jolt and takes us away from the main narrative thread of the Last Supper. But we have the same teaching that we have just seen there recorded in Mark. The key lesson, of course, is humility. I say, of course, we can see that's the key message. Living that key message is not, and of course, that's incredibly difficult. But at least we know what the key message is. He that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that doth serve. And Jesus provides an immediate analogy that there he is as their master, serving them with the meal. Now this was customary at the Passover, that the host would be either the father of the family or the senior member of the party would conduct the ceremony and would pass around the food and such. But he's using that Passover ceremony and his own part that he's partaking of that as the host to indicate this, that generally the person being served is greater, but here he is serving, and that's the message that they need. And we can't pass over this teaching without referring to the Last Supper in the Gospel of John, where the key introductory passage is indeed this very lesson, but through Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And we have this in verse 4 of chapter 13 in John. He riseth from supper, and laid aside his garments, and took a towel, and girded himself. After that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Now there's a scene there where Peter doesn't want to have his feet washed, and Jesus rebukes him. But I'll just pass over that for now, because that's not key to today's reading. But this is the spur then that Jesus uses, starting in verse 13. Ye call me Master and Lord, and ye say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that ye should do as I have done to you. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he is sent greater than he that sent him. If you know these things, happy are ye if you do them. And he returns to that theme later in the Last Supper there. So, very, very powerful key message from Jesus, to be humble and to serve those around one. That is the Christian way. I have in my notes here just something which is along the lines of all the commentators agreeing on this importance of humility, maybe not mentioning how difficult it really is, because some of them, and there's actually a question here regarding hierarchy. Do we think that hierarchies are something that Jesus approved of or not? And this will is in a way is sort of hidden in this phrase above here concerning the Gentiles. So referring to the Gentile communities, that there are kings or rulers, and then there are people that they give authority to rule over the people. And many commentators that I read, and these are from many years ago, it has to be said, but they take from this that Jesus approves of hierarchy, sees it as the right way to structure a society, but that people in power should be humble. And I have a slight difficulty with that, I suppose, because if you have power, it's very easy to appear humble. And in fact, most politicians would hate not to appear humble when they're in front of a TV camera. They're in it with you, they're one of the people. But of course, they have a lot of power. Having power means that you are special, because you get to make decisions that affect millions of other people. Same if you're at the top of an organization, or if you're in a powerful place in a church hierarchy, for example. So I think there's a sort of a deeper thread here, which is, to what degree do people in power appear humble, and to what degree are they truly humble? And I don't even mean how they feel, but actually how they act. So how many people in the top echelons of organizations, or the top echelons of government, or the top echelons of churches are cleaning people's feet on a regular basis away from television cameras and the public, or are scrubbing toilets, or are picking litter off the streets, because that's humble. Humble really means to do things for others where the only person that sees you do that is God. This was a lesson that Jesus taught, of course, in the Sermon on the Mount. If you're seen to do good things, you have your reward from men. It's only when you're not seen to do good things that you have your reward from God. Jesus changes the tone here and speaks very sensitively and gently with his disciples. You have continued with me in my temptations. And the easiest reading of temptations there is in the sense of trial, just like we saw in the rendition of the Lord's Prayer. Lead us not into temptation. A reading of that is, lead us not into trial. Do not allow us to walk into great hardships unless it's unavoidable. And Jesus speaks of their reward, that he appoints them a kingdom, just as his Father has appointed a kingdom to Jesus, that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Almost certainly Jesus is speaking to 11 disciples at this point, so he doesn't say sit on 12 thrones, he just says on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And there's sort of an implication here then that the focus may still be within the lost sheep of the nation of Israel. I think it's the pulpit commentary very much sees this kingdom that they are appointed to being the kingdom of Jesus Christ within the New Testament, that they are essentially heading that, and then that's the sense in which they're judging the 12 tribes of Israel. They're bringing people across from the Jewish race to the gospel. And it is also true to say that at least within the Acts of the Apostles that we really have in that book, which is written by, we believe, the same author as this gospel, it's mainly St. Paul that we get to follow. We don't really get to know that much about what the other disciples do in their travels. And it becomes the stuff of legend, how different disciples ended up evangelizing and how they were martyred and so on. But we don't have it really documented. But it was certainly St. Paul who really was the key apostle in terms of going to Gentile communities well away from the Holy Land. So it may be here that implicitly Jesus is indicating that they should stay in the vicinity of the Holy Land. I'm not quite sure, or whether he's really speaking of the kingdom of heaven here, and this being more of a divine role that they would have at some level that we simply can't conceive because it's regarding the kingdom of heaven. We do now change again, and this is a very personal interaction now, and I think a fascinating interaction. So Jesus turns to Peter and says his name twice, which is a sign of gentleness, of softness, of emotion, almost a poignant, Simon, Simon, behold. And he's looking, you just know that he's looking Simon right in the eye. Simon will be transfixed, and this being Peter, of course, will be transfixed. And imagine hearing these words from Jesus. Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. So to sift would be similar to that metaphor that John the Baptist used about Jesus, that the fan is in his hand, so separating the wheat from the chaff, so agitating very violently. But Jesus says, I have prayed for you, that your faith fails not. And then he goes on to say, and when you are converted, strengthen your brethren. And this is all really, really fascinating, because he doesn't say, and given you are converted. He says, when you are converted. So in a sense, he's saying here to Peter that your faith will fail. I've prayed for you that it fails not, but it will fail. But you're going to come back. You're going to recover from that. And when you do recover, you will be strong enough to strengthen your brothers. And this has elements of the famous book of Job in the Old Testament, where Job is sort of handed over by God. He's a righteous man, but the devil wants to sift him as wheat, and God allows it, and Job has this succession of just dreadful events befalling him, but he doesn't give up his faith. But that's quite a long book in the Jewish Bible, and has many lessons about the fragility and the subjectivity of faith. But I do see this reading here, that when thou art converted, when you bounce back from this. And it's fascinating reading some of the commentators' points on this. I think commentators have made some really interesting observations about the nature of Satan desiring governance over an individual. And we're reminded of the Lord's Prayer there. There's a line in the original Greek of the Lord's Prayer, apo tu poneru, apo tu poneru, which we translate as essentially from evil. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Apo tu poneru. But a direct translation of that phrase, actually, almost like a literal translation, would be from the evil one. From the evil one. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And here the evil one, Satan, is being described directly. And if the evil one is wishing to sift individuals as wheat, in the Lord's Prayer, when we say that prayer, if we say it every day, we're pleading with God that we are not handed over to Satan to be sifted as wheat. And one imagines that Satan is casting an eye over all of these disciples, and maybe Judas was the first to fall, so maybe they were all in line to be sifted, and it was just Judas who perhaps was the weak link, who was sifted most effectively and fell. And Jesus is saying to Peter here, you could fall too. In fact, you're next in line. We think of Peter as very strong, as the spokesperson for the disciples, but as the pulpit commentator points out, he's very confident and enthusiastic and impetuous, but those are signs of weakness sometimes, almost covering up for internal struggle. So it's really fascinating that in a way, with Jesus alive, his constant prayer for his disciples is perhaps continually rebuffing these attempts of Satan to have them fall. And it was just that it was impossible to save Judas from falling. And we have immediately from Peter, completely predictably, if we know Peter well, as we do from the Gospels, impetuous. He immediately responds, somewhat indignant, "But Lord, I am ready to go with thee both into prison and to death." And he means it. He's not just saying that, he means it, but he doesn't know that he's not ready to do those things. And we have this tragic poignancy here. "I tell you, Peter, the cock shall not crow this day before you shall deny me thrice that you even know me." And this Peter's great fall, his profound fall of thrice denying Christ at Christ's greatest moment of need, because he was afraid. He was afraid. And he didn't know what else to do. It was very human what Peter did. He was weak, he was human, he was frightened, and he denied Christ because he didn't know what to do. And we'll be coming to that scene very shortly in the next few readings. We know that he left the palace of the high priest weeping bitterly. But he didn't go and hang himself. He recovered. And in recovering, and I feel particularly after the Pentecost, being emboldened by the tongues of flame, as it were, of the Holy Ghost, is when he was truly converted, perhaps truly then fully armoured, and was able to truly be a rock. Remember his name, Petros, meaning rock. And it's fascinating here the subtlety that Jesus addresses him as Simon when he speaks of his weakness. But then he uses the word Peter, which is very rare for Jesus to call Simon by his given name Peter, but he does here when Peter is speaking like a rock. So Jesus using that name to indicate, look, even though you are called Petros, you're not a rock yet. Even before this day is done, you'll deny me 3 times. So, a very, very interesting interaction there between Jesus and Simon Peter. Very beautiful, and I think it is a lesson to all of us about the importance of prayer in daily communing with God the Father, and particularly that beautiful part of the Lord's Prayer, apo tu poneru, deliver us from the evil one, that we seek help on a daily basis to be kept from evil.